Thanks a lot for having me over. And I'm speaking from ASSYSTEM office here in France. And just to introduce you a little bit about ASSYSTEM, that it is an international engineering and project management group with a vast experience in nuclear industry, transportation, life sciences. And currently, ASSYSTEM is really focusing on the digitalization part of the industry. And so I would be talking here about a model-based approach for mission-critical systems here. And just to go quickly through the main topic, that let's consider a V-cycle of a system. Here, what you are seeing is a standard V-cycle which is used in transport or railways. Okay, so there are three phases, let's say that the design phase, the installation, and the operation phase. Now, within the design phase, you have a lot of system engineering involved. Now, the system engineering, the part of conceptualization, the system definition, operational context, all this is part of the system engineering up to the design and implementation phase and system validation also. Overall, system engineering plays the role over the entire life cycle, but this is the main concentration. And then you have the part of RAMS also. By RAMS, I mean reliability, availability, maintainability, and safety. The RAMS can be involved during the risk analysis and evaluation part, during the operation and maintenance part, and it is kind of like sandwiched in between. And eventually, at the end, we have the operation and maintenance part, which we consider where the new promoting the new technology which is being promoted, PHM, prognostics and health management, that comes into the role. Now, the idea here is to integrate all the three aspects of system modeling, the RAMS, and the PHM. And why do we need to do that? Because when we consider from the life cycle perspective of a system, as you can see that the operation and the support cost is forming the bulk of this iceberg. Now, this operation and support cost will go up for sure if there are, let's say, faults or problems in the design. It is the RAMS has not been done well. So, of course, the RAMS management systems and also the system modeling forms the most fundamental part to lower these costs. And for this purpose, we need an integrated system modeling and RAMS approach. And why would we need that? This is something what is the main point of the topic. And within this model-based approach, the vision within ASSYSTEM, what we have is to integrate the system modeling, which is based currently in ASSYSTEM using the model-based system engineering, and the reliability, availability, maintainability, and safety. Now here I'm using the RAM plus S sign because some practitioners consider the RAM and the safety part to be separate. But let's consider here for in this presentation, I will be using the word RAMS for now. And within RAMS, there are a lot of different kind of methodologies. There is a lot of different kind of analytical methodologies and the modeling methodologies. And the perspective of the RAMS is different from the system modeling part. And then eventually we have prognostics and health management, which is a data-driven approach. And I would be talking about all these three approaches in a very brief manner. So let's consider that what is the system modeling MBSE approach, the model-based system engineering approach. The current methods which are used is a very document-centric approach. In this document-centric approach, you have all the Excel sheets, all the other documents, the requirements, and there is not much coherency, and it is difficult to track. Now, with the MBSE approach, it is encouragement of a model-based approach to aid in system engineering. Now, this approach is not to replace the system engineering aspects, but it is to provide rigorous methods, to provide tools to aid in the system engineering aspects. And the MBSE application for the modeling, it is from the requirements, design, and the entire V&V activities. And within ASSYSTEM, what we want to aim for is to design for RAMS. Now, design for RAMS, what is the purpose here? Why we are calling it like that is because when the MBSE objectives are defined, it is not designed for the RAMS part of it. It is with a different perspective for the system, the modelers and the MBSE experts. And within ASSYSTEM, what we want to propose is to use the MBSE approach, the system modeling, while designing for the RAMS part. And within, we can see that the MBSE, it has a horizontal and a vertical integration. So the vertical integration, we can see that during the operational analysis, the system analysis, logical modeling and architecture, the physical architecture, there is a entire vertical integration, while also there is throughout the life cycle of the system, there is the horizontal integration, which means from the conceptual phase to the decommissioning of a system, it is involved in every phase. And so I will not go through the deep parts of the MBSE approach here, and I will jump to the RAMS approach here now. So I gave you a little idea about what was MBSE. Now, what is RAMS? RAMS is usually the four fundamental pillars of RAMS are reliability, availability, maintainability, and safety. These are kind of four kind of metrics. There are several metrics within them which form the entire domain. So it is a very vast domain in itself. And what is the conventional, and let's, if we are talking about, and this is a very, like take it with a pinch of salt, because this is just a generic idea. The representation of the entire idea of what we want to do through RAMS is that you have the failure modes, you have the PHM, we will talk about the PHM afterwards, but let's say that you have the failure modes which are coming from the FMEA, FMECA analysis, and you build your models. So there are different modeling methodologies which are like based on graph theory. These are based on stochastic Petri nets. There is Simulink. So these are kind of like advanced modeling methodologies. Then of course there is within Petri nets you have the Markov and the non-Markov parts, and then you have Simulink. And then there are the most standard ones which are like the fault tree analysis, the event tree, the reliability block diagrams, which are both a modeling and analytical methodology. And within the analysis methodology, we have the most commonly used, which we see, is the Monte Carlo simulations. And we also have exact methodologies, numerical approximation. And what is the purpose of all this? During using these modeling methodologies and analysis methodologies, it is to provide the RAMS metrics. There are several RAMS metrics, which, like I said previously, it depends on the reliability, availability, maintainability, and safety. So all metrics could be related to each other, and some of them can be derived from each other. So you have like MTTF, mean time to failure, mean time between failure, mean time to repair. Steady state analysis, you have availability metrics, reliability, and then you have mean time to first failure. Then you have rare event probabilities, which are more involved the safety aspects. Then, of course, you have safety margins, uncertainties when you are doing a probabilistic analysis. So we have, this is the whole idea of RAMS, let's say. And of course, I'm not covering in detail. So there are several parts which are might be left out. So please excuse me for that. But what is the problem with the current RAMS? Let's say, first of all, the complexity, that the systems are becoming more and more integrated and embedded. So with the increased complexity, the modeling within RAMS is becoming more and more complicated. And so it is more difficult to analyze and track. Then there is the consistency, the flow of information. When you are considering a RAMS analysis, there are the original equipment manufacturer, there are the suppliers, subcontractors. They are providing you with certain RAMS analysis from their side. You are using certain RAMS analysis from your side. Your methodologies, your modeling strategy is different from there. And so there is, first of all, there is a big disconnect of this information and the consistency. And of course, there is the lack of reusability because of this. And also the integration part, where RAMS and like MBSE are not very well integrated with each other. And then we have the cost. Now the point is that if you think about the V cycle before, which I showed you, the idea is that RAMS comes at a very late stage, almost at a system verification phase. So the problem at this stage is that if the system is not up to the mark, let's say, according to the RAMS standards, then what happens is either you have the option to design for support or you end up supporting a faulty design. Now, this can increase the cost because either you change the design or the cost would increase in the operation and maintenance phase. And of course, eventually at the end, we can say that in RAMS, there is a lot of manual approach. It has a lot of engineering judgment. And, like when you are analyzing a system, someone is using an exponential distribution and there are problems. Sometimes it happens that you have a Markov model and you change one distribution, which leads to a non-Markov model. But for some practitioners, it can, you can miss it. And you think your system is using a Markov model, but it has become a non-Markov process. So this is the problem with the RAMs. And here is something about PHM part. Now, what is PHM? PHM stands for Prognostics and Health Management. And within PHM, let's say that you have a physical system. What the idea is that on the physical system, especially the critical components, the critical subsystems, let's say whatever is considered to be critical, there are sensors installed. So the sensors can measure let's say the accelerometer can measure the XYZ axis with the time, or you have the pressure, temperature, volume flowing through a pipe. All these kind of sensors can be used. Now these sensors collect real-time data from the real system, and using this data, predictive models can be built. Now this is a part which is focused heavily on the data science and where machine learning and all these aspects come into play. And by using the real data, you can find the anomalies because you have your boundary conditions of the system performance well defined. And within this, PHM is able to help in detecting and isolating incipient faults to predict future failures. It can provide the remaining useful life of a system and several other indicators which can be considered as let's say the health indicators of the system. So overall, PHM is based on the real boundary conditions, the real operating conditions of a system, rather than what we have in RAMS, which is more about the averaged idea. It is about the average operating conditions which the system might need to be performing. But it can, in the real life, it can be different. So this is for example, just an example in a nuclear plant. Like if you consider this screen cleaners are just to, at the entry of a nuclear plant from the water body, like a river or the sea, there are screen cleaners installed to remove the garbage. And these screen cleaners can have, it is kind of like a basket which goes under the water to clean the garbage. And so it has the movement, like we have the data XYZ axis according to time. So it is a time series. And what we do is like we pre-process the data, we build our predictive models, and within this model, we train it based on the data we have. And with this, we can provide health indicators. And using these health indicators, we can give almost like a daily report about how the screen cleaners are performing. Normally, these screen cleaners, they are inspected like a periodic inspection once in, let's say, like a month or something. But with this, using the PHM idea, we can provide almost a daily report of how the movement of the screen cleaners are, if there are any anomalies, and we can include other operating conditions like the level of the seawater, if there is temperature changes, and all the weather conditions. So all this can be included to perform a holistic analysis using a real data. Now, why do we consider this model-based RAMS idea? The model-based RAMS idea is to integrate all the three aspects which I have talked to you about just before now. So it wants to include the MBSE approach, the RAMS approach, and the PHM approach. which starts from the design phase through the installation phase and up to the operation and maintenance phase, and eventually for the decommissioning also. And within this, we want to use the MBSE as a starting point where we design for RAMS analysis. Now let's consider a system like it is a submarine, for example. And if you consider a hierarchical breakdown of the system, you have the submarine on the, like as a whole entire system. On a subsystem level, you have different kind of subsystems. So example, a weapon subsystem, communication, control, compressed air subsystems, all these subsystems, and they are interconnected through some relationships with each other. So this is just an example. So don't take it like that it is a real, like let's say, the real model. But at a subsystem level, you have this model. Within each subsystem, like let's say if you take, for example, a compressed air subsystem, you could have various kind of assets, which could include software, electrical, electronics, mechanical, INC, hydraulics, all these kind of things. They are also interconnected with each other. So you are going deeper into the hierarchy of the model. And within one of them, like for example, if you take electronics, there is a component are connected together. Maybe they are connected or dependent on each other. Maybe it is a redundancy. You can have active or passive redundancy within at different levels also actually. And you can consider that up to certain level, these components are replaceable at or repairable. At after a certain level, they could be only replaceable. So all this is something which can be modeled very easily using the MBSE approach, where all the logical relationships, all the functional operational relationships can be captured very easily. And this is why we want to start with MBSE based system modeling approach, and which is designed for RAMS eventually. And so this is the same V cycle. Let's say I have compressed it here. You have the digital models which are made by MBSE. So you have open source tools like CAPELLA, and which are using the models like functional, operational, physical models. And what we want to achieve is that to translate these models into a RAMS compatible model as a starting point for the RAMS experts. Now, we are not saying that the system models would provide an automatic transformation into a RAMS compatible model, because both ideas are similar in some ways, but they have a different perspective. Their objectives are different. So what we want to do is to provide like a basic building block for the RAMs using the MBSE models. And of course, within with the RAMs, PHM, if you see with the practitioners, especially in the railway industry, PHM is very well now being integrated with the RAMs. So many organizations have like a RAMs and a PHM department together working. So there is a good integration within RAMS and PHM, but there is a big disconnect between the MBSE or the digital system modeling and the RAMS. So let's say, what is the state of the art there? This idea is not like, let's say, coming out of the world. It is existing, but we are having certain like, let's say, this is a research paper. So most of it, the idea is a research and development idea. You have the functional, non-functional requirements using the system engineering part. Okay, and you capture all the system requirements. You have the whole system model built, but this model is built with the RAMS objective in mind. Okay, so with all the system modeling, which is a sysml, like let's say you have the sysml, uml languages, different kind of languages which are used in the system modeling phase. What the main idea is that the sysml model is to be transformed into a simulink. So this paper talks about the sysml model to be transformed into a Simulink compatible model, by which different simulations, like with the Simulink, you can perform Monte Carlo simulations for the RAMS objectives. And with all the system simulation results, there could be design suggestions, there could be reliability analysis report, and it can provide a feedback to improve the system designs also. So this is an idea which is talked in 2012 in one paper. This is another, it is a very recent one. It is envisioned approach, which is being promoted by Thales and the European Space Agency. So it is specifically for the space industry. And here again, you have the entire, let's say, the system engineering aspect, the system modeling. And what they want to provide is this, the main focus should be this SIS2RAMS, where the satellite model or the let's say system model is converted to a RAMS compatible model, which again provides a feedback. And of course, you have the different kind of outputs, which could be related to reliability or which could be related to the system modeling. And what we want to propose, this is the idea which we are working on at ASSYSTEM, is you have the MBSE. Now, what we don't want what we want is to complement each other's approaches to integrate each other. So the MBSE can be working independently also, or it can be useful to design for RAMS depending on the objective of the project. And this is the main focus, that this is the main focus also, and the main problem also, that if we are able to translate these models to build a basic building block for the RAMS compatible model. So there are several RAMS model. Let's say for example, you can consider fault tree analysis. You have which could be the most basic model. You can then go deeper into building stochastic Petri nets. If you are able to capture the states, you can build Markov models, and you can build like reliability block diagrams. So this provides a building block for the RAMS experts, and then with the RAMS experts can build over that model so that the loss of information doesn't happen that much. We are able to capture using in the RAMS what the MBSE people also captured. Okay, so we are not working completely disconnected from each other. And then RAMS is, like I said, it is integrated very well with PHM, and which is more artificial intelligence based and data science based methodologies. And PHM can also be actually integrated with MBSE, because let's say that the entire maintenance, the predictive maintenance process, it can be modeled also using an MBSE approach. And the PHM can provide a live information that your system remaining useful life is 6 months, and then something different happens and the RUL has changed. So it can provide to track and help in the maintenance processes. However, there are certain, benefits of this that we have is the better visualization using the MBSE, better structuring, the coherence, the information is not lost here. And then we have the early phase, because the RAMS analysis providing a feedback for the MBSE approach can be an iterative approach. So we can do it in tandem with each other rather than at a very late stage. So it is because it is an iterative process eventually. And eventually in the later stages, we can use AI methodologies for improving the RAMS models also. So overall, this could be a cost-effective way. However, there are challenges that within RAMS, like I said, there are several different models. So for each model, you need to translate, and you are going to, if the translation is not correctly done, it can be, it can be counterproductive. And sometimes traditional approaches could be better, but that is debatable, because it is very, very specifically to the need. And the readability of the feedback, which, for example, the RAMS is providing to the MBSE, how is it read back for the MBSE experts to improve the design? And of course, it is not a magic solution. So it is not going to provide, like a red and green button that you click on it and it just transforms the model and you have the entire model for the whole life cycle. Of course, it needs always expert inputs, and the process needs to be tracked. So this is what I have to say. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask me. And thanks a lot.
Great, thank you. That was really interesting, and it's interesting how you can link the different bits of information together to create something that's actually quite smart, and hopefully help us as we move forward in Industry 4.0. So thank you. We've had some questions come in. So first up from Fahad Izar, what is the level of analysis in RAMS, please?
Sorry, can you repeat it again, please?
What is the level of analysis in RAMS, please?
Well, level of analysis by which I guess the person who is asking the question means the hierarchy of the models. So the hierarchy of the models, it depends on the MBSE, because within MBSE you can go deeper and deeper in from a system level to up to the component level or the item level. So depending on the analysis which you want to provide, depending on the models you want to create, it can be captured at different levels. So if you want to do at a subsystem level analysis, it can provide you the solution at the subsystem level analysis.
Thank you. So it's flexible depending on what your needs are. And that leads us nicely on to the next question from Anthony Bell. In your experience, do certain industries have preferred methods for RAMS analysis?
Sorry, can you please repeat it again?
In your experience, do certain industries have preferred methods for RAMS analysis?
Well, of course, you have preferred methods. There are, there are the standard methods. You can find industries still using fault tree analysis, reliability block diagrams, where there are advanced approaches of stochastic Petri nets. There is Markov modeling. So it depends, depends from organization to organization, I would say.
Great, thank you. And a question from Hugh Stevenson. In classical RAMS methods for complex systems, much time is spent mapping inputs to working files. So, for example, components on a PNID to FEMA and criticality tables, etc. Does this new model-based approach solve this by improving links between inputs and working stages?
Well, it depends, because, of course, like let's say for the definition of the failure mode, so you might still need a FAMA or a FMECA analysis. So it doesn't completely isolate the requirement of the RAMS, but it is to complement the RAMS analysis. So it is to not lose the information which the MBSE might have captured. But of course, it is to be seen actually.
Great, thank you. And one from Jazalou. So please can you discuss some of the barriers for the use of MBSE in the nuclear industry? How do we educate licensees and the regulator in the adoption of MBSE?
Well, for nuclear industry, I would say that as you probably all know, that whatever you do now might see the reality in a real plant in 20 years or something, because there are strict safety regulatory authorities depending on the countries, and depending on they have their standards which are to be strictly followed. So this is let's say, that's why I say that it is a R&D part, and MBSE can help to create the digital twins, which is to aid and complement right now. Now, later on, maybe it could be acting as a complete replacement, but for now, the idea could be just to complement the current processes.
Okay, great, thank you. And one from Marinos Panoitou, sorry if I haven't pronounced that quite right. It sounds like model-based analysis approach could revolutionize how maintenance and testing is managed and performed at a plant. How far do you think you are from achieving this, and what are the obstacles you're facing at the moment?
Yeah, sorry. So right now we are working on the proof of concept. This is the idea is that you have the fault trees. You will have to build a kind of like a transformation software or something which is able to understand what the MBSE experts are saying, and it is able to translate that information into a RAMS compatible information. Now that is a that is the main challenge actually of the whole approach. If you can achieve that successfully, the rest of the path could be smoother. And for this fault trees, stochastic Petri nets, all these different methodologies, we would need to work specifically on it. Yeah.
Great, thank you. So you'd create something niche for each scenario.
Yeah.
Thank you. And we have time just for one more question on a human factors angle. So has a human factors consideration been included in this work? For example, can you put an HRA model bolted in?
Well, the human reliability, I guess, in the nuclear industry, it is being studied a lot, and especially if you consider the safety aspects. So, yes, it could be integrated. That's why I say that it will never be for replacing things, it would be for complementing things. So, the human reliability advancements in the HRA part can be included within the RAMS part, because the MBSE will just provide a building block, the fundamental building block for the models which you could use. And you can improve those models to include, like, let's say, HRA based analysis, and it could provide feedback to improve the system also, maybe for fault tolerant system towards human errors.
Great, thank you. So you built on whatever models you might need to satisfy what you're trying to do. So that's all we have time for. If we weren't able to answer your question, we will try and answer them offline. And now we will have a 5-minute break. So thank you very much, Ajit. That was really informative, and I hope everyone got something out of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Georgia. Have a great day, everyone.